Well, blessings in Jesus, dear friends. My name, of course, is James Jacob Prash from Moriel Ministries, coming to you here on Catching Up with Jacob. It's going to be very difficult for you to catch up with Jacob now because I'm probably on a 787 bound from Perth, Australia to Singapore or something like that. Nonetheless, we have just completed the New Zealand and the Australian segments of my present itinerary in Australasia. I would like to thank Pierre and Marguerite and Warwick Thorpe and our other friends who helped us in New Zealand to make it a blessing and a success. Also, of course, to Davy Rosengreen, to Rhiannon, and our volunteers here in Australia who likewise made the Australian itinerary a blessing and a success. It's my first time back to this area of the world since before COVID, and it was wonderful to be here with Pastor Alan Hodge and with other old friends, as well as new friends. But from here, I'm going on to the Far East. I'm speaking in Singapore at the Calvary Chapel. We'll be at Calvary Chapel in Singapore next Sunday, which I think is the 9th of June. And we look forward to seeing you there if you're in Singapore. Some people may even come from Johor and Malaysia or Batam, but we shall be in Singapore. From there, it'll be basically mission-oriented meetings, evangelism and so forth in Thailand and Vietnam, and then we go on to Japan before returning to the USA, and ultimately to Britain, where we are organizing an event in the British Midlands, Lord willing, for August. Nonetheless, hope to see you in Singapore if you're able to join us, and our thanks once again to the Moriel teams and branches in Australia and New Zealand. It was a blessing to be back. We've recorded some new material that'll be posted on Moriel TV and also on RTN on Word for the Weekend. But here we are. My apologies for not being able to be a full participant in Catching Up with Jacob. Just the travel schedule did not allow for that to happen. Nonetheless, we will be doing the hot take and one or two other comments. So let's begin with Catching Up with Jacob. It goes as follows. Something that has been downplayed by the mainstream media, but even almost sidestepped by the more balanced and fair media. And by more balanced and fair, I mean relative. There are some good news outlets, such as Newsmax and One America, and there are some that are less biased, like Fox and Sky News Australia. Are less biased. They're a mixture of fair and establishment. But there are some good platforms. Because of what is happening in Gaza and in Ukraine, what is happening in Galilee, in northern Israel, has not been given the amount of news coverage that is warranted. Remember, between 80 and 100,000 Israelis, particularly from the area around Metula, Kiryat Shmona, northern Israel, around Tel Dan, that area, have had to be evacuated from their homes. Marayun is just opposite, and there are Hezbollah positions with Iranian weapons and Iranian advisors, Iranian Revolutionary Guard personnel, spitting distance from the border fence. This is not a good thing. It's been problematic right from the beginning. This has not been a one-front war. Because of the brutality and the savagery of what transpired on October 7th, it is understandable how media gave that the focus and did not focus on what was really happening in Galilee as much. But this Iranian orchestrated attack involved attacks by the Houthis on Israeli shipping and aiming rockets at Eilat in southern Israel on the Gulf of Aqaba. It was obviously Gaza. It was obviously an increase in terrorism on the West Bank, but it was also activities in Syria aimed at Israel and attacks from Lebanon. All of these are proxy attacks by the Iranians that the Obama administration has funded by unfreezing assets and cash, by paying them money, literally taking American taxpayer money, $6 billion, and giving it to terrorist Iran. And of course, by not enforcing the oil embargoes that were internationally agreed. What we had happening even last week and into this week was the disclosure that Iran had nearly tripled the amount of weapons-grade uranium that has been managed to enrich with the help, the de facto help of Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and their administration, okay, John Kerry, and so forth. These policies are continued by Jake Sullivan, by Austin, by Blinken, by Obama, and by Biden, and by Harris, but I have no doubt that Barack Obama and Valerie Jarrett and Susan Rice are pulling the strings on back of the scenes, at least to a fair degree. So even Britain, even France, and even Germany wanted to move to make a UN censure against Iran because Iran now has the capacity to very quickly, by some intelligence estimates, within a matter of days, to assemble 3 nuclear warheads. Bearing in mind they also have a missile capacity to deliver them, potentially. Okay. The Obama administration, Biden, Blinken, pressured Britain, pressured Germany, and pressured France not to diplomatically pursue the censure against Iran. Again, anybody looking at this logically would be tempted to use the words treason, betrayal, not just of Israel, but of America. They're within days, potentially, of assembling nuclear warheads. All made possible through the generosity and political support, effectively, of Barack Obama and now his stooge successor regime. Don't censor them. They continued with their process of nuclear enrichment with technology provided by Russia, but don't censor them. But they're only days away from developing nuclear warheads, potentially. At the same time, they're manipulating the Houthis to shoot missiles at ships of all nations going up the Red Sea and shoot missiles at Eilat, Israel, and the Lower Negev. And they're the sponsors of Hamas and of Hezbollah and allies of Assad in Syria, where drones have been fired against Israel at Galilee as well. Despite all that, don't censor them. Whose side is Joe Obama on? Well, we know. The same as the Saudi Arabians had the Bush administration in their back pocket, the equivalent seems to be true of the Joe Obama administration. They're actually trying to block a diplomatic censoring of Iran on the very precipice of creating a nuclear abyss. People are becoming increasingly worried about the potential of Russia setting off a nuclear device in Eastern Europe as a warning to the West, now that American weapons are being used to attack Russia itself. Legitimate fear, I will not argue with that proposition. However, Iran is much, much more dangerous. Much more dangerous. A nuclear-armed Iran? Only possible because of the money provided by Obama and Biden. Their economy was in tatters. When there was an attempted rebellion against the mullahs, the religious fanatics who control Iran, in the early years of the first term of Barack Obama, he did nothing to support the opposition, and did everything he could to negotiate with the regime of the mullahs, while they were sponsoring terror and killing Americans. But now let's move back to what's happening in Galilee. This attack is happening on more than one front. It's happening on a southern front with the attacks on Eilat. Again, Iran is done back at what the Houthis are doing. There have been attacks launched from Syria, again at the behest and control, the remote control of Iran. There are attacks from Lebanon, massive. The amount of rockets, not just the usual Katyushas, but now drones and longer-range missiles provided by Iran using Russian technology, of course, in their development, are targeting Galilee and have been since shortly after October 7th. Politically, I usually agree with the British journalist Melanie Phillips. I thank God for her honesty, integrity, and courage as a journalist who tells the truth. I pray that she comes to know Yeshua as her Messiah. She is a Jew. I pray she becomes a completed Jew. I really do. I admire the woman, and there's certain other journalists who are not believers who I do admire, Andrew Bolt in Australia being another one. I only wish that he was a believer, a saved Christian. But he is certainly a journalist of some honesty and integrity, and there are others. It's not all controlled by the mainstream media, although most of it certainly is. The mainstream media and mainstream social media have no honesty, no integrity, no commitment to democratic freedom of speech or press. They have none of that. They're all corrupt. Looking at Galilee, 80 to 100,000 people have been evacuated. Now, because of Gaza, if what happened in Gaza happened in the United States in proportionate numbers, it would have been approximately 40,000 Americans killed. 40,000 in proportion, demographic proportion. Yet Biden is now blaming Israel, blaming the Israeli government for prolonging the war. Hamas has stated repeatedly there will be more October 7th. They have stated repeatedly their goal is to destroy not only all Zionists, but all Jews, and then they're going to come after Christians. They have said that to the stupidity of left-wing students in universities across the Western world demonstrating in support of them. Despite what they do to homosexuals under Sharia, despite what they do to women under Sharia, these same left-wing imbeciles ignore what happens under Sharia and are backing Hamas. Hamas believes and applies Sharia. They execute homosexuals. They handcuff them and throw them headfirst off of roofs. What they do to women, a woman can't go out without the permission of her husband or her father. You wouldn't believe it unless you've lived where Sharia is practiced, and I have been to countries where it is practiced. Yet the stupidity of the American left and the corruption of the American government is unfathomable. It is betrayal, not only of Israel, not only of moderate Muslim states, so-called. It is a betrayal of the United States. American hostages are being held. Americans are the victim of terror funded by Iran. And Biden blames Israel. How dare you want to utterly destroy Hamas? We want a ceasefire. You're prolonging the war so that they will live to carry out their threat. We know that Iran will rearm them again, and there will be other October 7th as they have promised because of their religious ideology of jihad. And Biden wants to make sure they're able to do it, the same as Biden and Obama wanted to make sure the Iranians became a nuclear power, apparently, from their policies. This is how evil the American left is. And I'm not a Republican, I'm an independent. But Galilee. Attacks on Galilee have been intense since the beginning. Immediately after October 7th, rocket attacks on Galilee commenced. Here is where I respectfully, very respectfully disagree with Melanie Phillips. She said the Israelis planned a preemptive attack on southern Lebanon to stop Galilee from being attacked. I disagree. It would have been preventative. It would have been responsive. The Israelis had adequate legal grounds to invade southern Lebanon, not preemptively to prevent an attack, but in response to an attack that had already commenced. The numbers of missiles ranging above 150,000 by some estimates with drones. And again, we're not just talking about Katyushas, not that those don't kill, but more long-range weapons that can hit anywhere in Israel. Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Beersheba, anywhere. It is a bigger threat than Gaza. It is an existential threat to Israel's existence. The corrupt Biden administration that is faulting Israel for not eliminating Hamas so they cannot carry out their promises of doing more October 7th. Biden wants that to happen again. Joe Obama seems to want that to happen again. And they seem to want Iran to have nuclear weapons. I am not exaggerating. That is how demonically evil the Democratic Party of the United States has become. Even with left-wing Jews like Schumer and Blumenthal and Cohen and Wasserman Schultz in the same party with the squad, with vehement anti-Semites. People who are supportive of terror, who will not close down the CAIR and at least have a congressional investigation of it, who will not deal with people like Zogby and Hooper and people who have been connected with Hamas and have made statements supportive of Hamas, supportive of terror. A terror that has beheaded children, raped and murdered women, killed innocent people for no reason, based on a justification that was a pack of lies. There was no Israeli occupation of Gaza. There were no Israelis there. There haven't been since 2005. The Israelis were allowing people who lived in Gaza, 6,000 to 8,000 a day, to commute to work across the border to earn a living in Israel. There was no blockade of food, water, medicine, or electricity. None. Absolutely nothing. What you did have, however, is the active cooperation of the United Nations, the United Nothing, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency, cognizantly allowing Hamas to have bases of military operation and command and control centers underneath UN facilities. Knowing it, actively collaborating in radical Islamic terror. 1/3 of the countries in the United Nothing are Muslim. Who's paying for this? Joe Obama is taking the money of American taxpayers to fund this. European taxpayers are funding it. British taxpayers are funding it, but especially Americans. Again, betrayal. The United Nations Relief and Work Agency should not be funded. Donald Trump stopped. Joe Obama began giving them money again, knowing that they're actively collaborating in terror. But then, to prevent Israel from responding to the rocket attacks from Lebanon where there is 150,000 projectiles capable of wreaking havoc, of destroying much of Israel, and not allowing the Israelis to go in and establish a defense parameter as they once had from the Litani River down to the border of Galilee. They had that. Now understand what's happened in Lebanon. With the French partition of Syria, Lebanon was to be primarily Christian. When the Roman Catholic Christians, the Maronites, were driven out by radical Muslims, the Vatican said nothing and turned their back on the Maronite Roman Catholics. There was only one country who helped the Maronite Roman Catholics and took them in as refugees and gave them a new home. That was Israel. Yet the world hates Israel. It absorbed Christian war refugees driven out of their homes. They have lived in Lebanon for 1,000 years. Their families have been there for centuries and centuries and were driven out by Islam, and only Israel took the refugees. And the world wants to condemn Israel. You couldn't imagine such hypocrisy, but it is the reality. Israel had set up that parameter before. Israel had a defense parameter with a Christian enclave south of the Litani River before. It was called Free Lebanon, and they had a policy called Good Fence. It was controlled by Christians, mainly Phalango Christians, and French-speaking Arab Christians. They, of course, protested. They were not Arab. Many of the Phalangists, they would speak French, and they would say, Je suis Phénicien. They would say, I am of Phoenician descent. They didn't want to say they were Arab descent. They identified with the ancient Phoenician sea warriors, who, with King Hiram, were allies of Israel in the days of King David and King Solomon, and they helped build the temple. They helped build both the first and second temple with the Phoenicians. These Christians of southern Lebanon, small c, many of them claim to be descendants of the Phoenicians, not Arabs, but there are Arab Christians, Greek Orthodox and others, and Maronite Roman Catholics, and so forth. This enclave existed under pressure from the American government. Israel gave it up. They left the defense perimeter. We know what happened to the Christians who were left there, what Islam did to it. We know that Hariri was assassinated in Lebanon by the Syrian government backed by Iran. That was the fault of American policy. It was American policy. The Saudi-owned and operated Bush dynasty pressured Israel to leave Gaza without a peace treaty. I was not against Israel leaving Gaza, but there had to be a peace treaty and security guarantees, something negotiated with Egypt, where Egypt would be responsible for the security of Gaza, or something like this, in league with or in association with the Camp David Accords, to make sure there'd be no terror and no more war. And they could have planted a Palestinian, so-called Palestinian Gazan state. But of course, both Fatah, Arafat's henchmen, who now run the Palestinian Authority, and then the leaders of Hamas stole the money. 3 men in Hamas alone, who are living in a 5-star hotel in Qatar, stole $11 billion between them. Money given by the international community to help their own people and to build the embryo of what could have been an independent Gazan state. The corruption's unbelievable. Using their own people and their own children as human shields after murdering Israeli children. You can go on, and we've talked about these things. And the hypocrisy of the Biden administration, threatening arms embargoes on Israel, threatening Israel, pressuring Israel. Well, they did the same with Lebanon. When Israel left southern Lebanon, giving up that Christian enclave that protected Galilee and protected the Christians, there was to be an assured guarantee that never again would southern Lebanon be used to attack Israel. That's what the Americans said we're going to see happens. That's what the United Nothing said would see happens. Just get out and it will be all right. Well, it wasn't all right for the Christians who were driven out of their homes where they've lived for centuries. And it wasn't all right for Israel. They're back doing the same thing again. Israel should have attacked southern Lebanon and invaded it quickly at the same time they went into Gaza. But they were stopped by the pro-Iranian, de facto pro-Iranian Joe Obama regime. I pray the swift judgment of Christ on Biden and his administration and on the powers on back of it. That includes Barack Obama. We are not just talking about a betrayal of Israel or of Middle East Christians or of moderate Muslims. We're talking about a betrayal of the West and of America. It's Iranian terror that's on back of this. And Iran on the precipice of acquiring 3 nuclear warheads and having the missile potential, the delivery system, to launch them. This could lead to a nuclear exchange. Israel would respond. Thank you, Barack Obama. Thank you, Joe Biden. May the swift and merciless judgment of Christ come upon you. I pray this, Lord God, you promised you'd bless those who bless and curse those who curse. The way you destroyed Ibrahim Raisi, may you do the same to those who are supporting Iranian-sponsored Islamic terror. I want the judgment of God to come on them. Because if it doesn't, the judgment of God will come on America and on the West because of them. God is no respecter of persons. Better his judgment fall on these corrupt politicians than fall on the United States because of them. But this is what we're dealing with. People are obviously consumed in an election year with the misuse of the judiciary and the Injustice Department and the Federal Bureau of Intimidation for political purposes against Donald Trump. They know that even people who voted for Biden realized they were considerably better off financially and economically under Donald Trump than they were under Biden. Hispanic Americans know that, and a number of Black Americans have acknowledged that. Always 2 standards. I see no prosecution of Joe Biden. He has had classified documents from the time he was senator and United States vice president in his garage, in his garage. But the FBI only raided Mar-a-Lago. 2 standards. Now, the jury selection for the trial of Hunter Biden was loaded. The corrupt judge in New York refused to relocate Donald Trump's trial out of New York, where you would get a fair jury instead of a politically biased one. With Hunter Biden, however, no problem. Look where the trial's taking place. They can load the jury. You have people on that jury who have family members that have drug convictions themselves. How are they going to vote? It's all fixed, it's all loaded, it's all corrupt. The only justice will be when Alvin Bragg and Fannie Willis and that despicable judge in New York and Christopher Wray and Comey and Strzok and Lisa Page and Eric Holder and Lynch stand before the judgment seat of Christ. There will be justice. But I have no hope in man's justice. I do, however, pray for God's intervention. Hunter Biden, drug addict. He was kicked out of the Navy. Joe Biden lied and lied and lied, saying he never benefited from his son's business activities. There is proof, documented proof he did, and documented proof he lied. But he gets a pass from CNN and ABC and Stephanopoulos. He gets a pass from Rachel Maddow. He gets a pass. Lawrence O'Donnell from the left-wing media. He gets a pass. The media is not fair. Silicon Valley is not fair. The dice are loaded. The courts are not fair. Nothing is fair. The only way that justice is blind is it doesn't want to see its own corruption. That's the judicial system. Again, this is the implosion of democracy. It is what happens when Judeo-Christian nations who were bequeathed democracy because of the influences of the Judeo-Christian faith and principles abandon the God who gave them the Holy Writ that engendered democratic principles. No, I do not believe all the founding fathers of America were Christians. They were not, but they all believed in biblical principles. And I certainly do not believe that the Puritans were spotless, but they understood it could only work, democracy could only work, as if Britain was governed by men who were governed by God. Now it is governed by men who are godless. America is governed by the godless. Both parties in America are run by the godless. The mainstream parties in Britain are run by the godless. Now I fear a re-election of Biden could take place if he's not replaced, and maybe even if he is. These judicial decisions, this wrongful conviction of Donald Trump, where the trial was absolutely rigged. Just listen to the comments of Alan Dershowitz, who was in the court. It was a rigged trial, a kangaroo court, a conviction that only took place by malfeasance. The conviction of Donald Trump only took place by judicial and juridical malfeasance. A corrupt prosecution and a corrupt judge who told the jury essentially what to do, who did not allow witness evidence to be entered. Again, I'd point you to the comments of Alan Dershowitz, who witnessed it. Unbelievable. But it can cause a certain percentage, certainly of rhino Republicans particularly, and a certain percentage of independents to not vote for Donald Trump. This could be crucial in the swing states, in Pennsylvania and in the Rust Belt of the upper Midwest, in Wisconsin and in Michigan. Possibly also in other swing states, but certainly in the upper Midwest and in Pennsylvania. It could not inconceivably cause Donald Trump to lose. I've said from the beginning, the Republican party essentially stinks. It's no better than the Democratic Party. There are people in it who may be conservative or libertarian, but the party itself is no good. No good. It's a corrupt party like the Democrats. And a lot of the people in the RNC have always been stupid. They've been people of low intelligence. What happened in the midterm elections? There should have been a retaking of the Senate and a sweeping majority of the House. The worthless garbage Republican Party only narrowly regained control of the House, and they're there by 2 seats. And they actually lost in the Senate. Yes, it was the fault of the RNC and of the rhinos, but it was also the fault of Donald Trump personally. We all like Herschel Walker, but he was no match for Warnock in Georgia. Dr. Oz was a carpetbagger and should not have been allowed to run for Senate in Pennsylvania. They had Catherine Barrett, a black conservative woman, who was a better candidate. Donald Trump bears responsibility, in part, for what happened in 2022. It was a failed political leadership by Mr. Trump, by the RNC, and of course by the rhinos, people like Romney and so forth. Again, as I've always said, they're only Democrats sitting on the opposite side of the aisle. John Cornyn and people like this. It is entirely possible that Biden could win, or another Democrat, if they replace him with Newsom or someone else, could win. This strategy of corrupting the judiciary for political purposes could achieve what it was designed to achieve. I'm not saying it will, I'm saying it could. We really need to pray. People need to pray desperately. But remember, America, Britain, Europe, Australia, New Zealand are under God's judgment. The Republic of Ireland is going to come under God's judgment. Mark my words. This is God's judgment. How can somebody so bad get reelected? It's not about that. There's spiritual deception, and there's a lot of very stupid people. Feminazis, feminists, left-wing feminists. Now you have biological male athletes with a natural orthomuscular advantage over women playing female sports. Thank you, feminism. Thank you, left-wing women. You made it possible. The women who watch The View, Bihar and Whoopi Goldberg, and hosted it. These are stupid women. These are stupid, stupid women, just as there are stupid, stupid men. You've got males, biological males, going to women's prisons, raping women in prisons. Thank you, feminism. Thank you. You made it possible. And now the left backing Hamas? There were brawls in the streets of Philadelphia this week when LGBTQ supporters of Hamas, they actually call themselves queers for Hamas and things like this, got in a fight with ordinary supporters of Hamas because under Sharia, homosexuality is a capital crime, and they had a brawl. You stupid, stupid people. Left-wing LGBTQ, you are stupid, stupid people. Now, I do not say that all homosexuals are left-wing. You have Douglas Murray, you have David Rubin. I don't agree with their sexuality, but they keep it to themselves. It's their own business. They're politically conservative. But most of them are left-wing. They tie the noose for their own hangman's rope. The feminazis have done this. The homosexuals are doing it. These stupid people. God has given them over to their own stupidity and judgment. This is the reality of what is happening. And it's happening this week. Please watch Galilee. A war can come in Galilee and in southern Lebanon, and the world will blame Israel. And the Biden administration is on the side of the enemy. This is what's happening. American Jews, most of them will remain silent. They won't do anything. They'll just be like those Jews who thought Hitler was a fad until they wound up in a gas chamber. It's not a fad. There's a real threat to the American, British, and European, and Australian Jewish communities, and it is a serious, viable threat, and stupid Jews who vote Democrat may as well sew a yellow star on their jacket and pay their own train fares to Auschwitz. As I've said before, that's what they're doing. Illegal immigrants taking away the social benefits and bringing crime into the black and Hispanic communities. Those blacks and Hispanics who vote Democrat, you're voting for your own death, taking away your own future. That which should be going to help you is going to people with no legal right to be in the country because you voted for it. You are stupid people. Thankfully, some Hispanics and some blacks are waking up. That brings me to my last point. If Mr. Trump manages to win the election by the hand of God, and he can certainly lose it, the vice president must be a president in waiting, not just in case Mr. Trump is unable to finish his term for any reason. That is always true. But because he can only be a one-term president, he cannot run again. This must be a president in waiting, a vice president being groomed to replace him. Ideologically and politically, Governor Burgum of North Dakota is a good man. Politically, however, electorally, it doesn't make sense. North Dakota is going to back Donald Trump in the election. He's going to get the electoral votes from a sparsely populated state with only a few votes. He's going to get it anyway. It'll contribute nothing to his reelection. Nothing. Senator Vance is a very good man. He's maybe the best man in the Senate. Others would say that about Ted Cruz, but certainly Senator Vance is one of the best men in the Senate. Top tier. But Ohio is going to go for Donald Trump most likely anyway in the election. He will gain nothing electorally by having Senator Vance. Even though I like Senator Vance, and I like the governor of North Dakota. They're both people I would vote for if I lived in those states. Then there's Marco Rubio. Cubans are seen as or perceived as less Hispanic. Puerto Ricans and Cubans are perceived as less Hispanic in the American Hispanic community. Puerto Ricans are born American citizens. And Cubans came as refugees from Castro, and they've been there a long time, since the Bay of Pigs. They are ethnically Latinos, but they are not the same as Mexican Americans or other Latin Americans or Dominicans. They're different. They're culturally different. All Hispanics are not the same. How helpful Marco Rubio could be in swaying the Hispanic vote to Donald Trump is something that I think is being overestimated by Mr. Trump if he picks Mr. Rubio. Secondly, Mr. Rubio is the senator from Florida. It is almost certain, thanks to Governor DeSantis and the shifting demographics in Florida and people going to Florida from blue states, that Mr. Trump is going to win the electoral votes of Florida in the general election. Mr. Rubio will contribute nothing to his reelection. But also, Mr. Rubio is not a conservative. He is a right-center rhino. He is a right-of-center rhino. He knows how to talk conservative. But when you look at his voting record and his policies, he is a rhino. He is not a conservative. Arguably, Senator Tim Scott is also a rhino, some would say. I do believe him to be a committed Christian. He might be a more viable, or probably would be a more viable candidate in terms of taking black votes away from the Democrats. But his state is likely to go with Donald Trump anyway. Again, he's not contributing much electorally. Electorally, he'd be the best candidate in terms of taking votes from the Democrats because he's black. And unfortunately, there are many black people who will vote on the basis of skin color instead of ideology. We saw that with Obama. The standard of living of blacks went down drastically under Obama. Family income went down by $900 per family among Afro-American families under Obama, and there's still blacks who will support him, even though it was to their own economic disadvantage and the disadvantage of their families. This is a reality. I've seen this not only with blacks. I've seen it with Irish. My mother's family is Irish. I remember there were Irish people who voted for Biden, and a lot, when I was a kid, voted for Kennedy because he was Irish. I have seen this happen with Italians in New York. Giuliani, whether you like him or not, a lot of Italians voted for him because he was Italian. Now, some agreed with him, but they vote by the last name. I have seen this happen with other ethnic groups. I'm not picking on blacks or singling out blacks. I've certainly seen it among Jews. There are Jews who will vote for left-wing Jews because they're Jewish without thinking of their policies. I'm not singling out blacks, but it is absolutely true of many black Americans. They'll vote for somebody because they're black, irrespective of their policies or abilities. In this, Tim Scott would be the ideal candidate electorally. But is he a real conservative? And his state is going to go for Trump again anyway. Among the candidates I see now, there is no ideal one. No ideal one. Whoever it is, there are two things that have to be looked at. One, can this person be elected president 4 years from now? Because Donald Trump can't run again. Can he be groomed into that position? A lot of these people have legislative backgrounds, not executive backgrounds. Somebody who can be the next president and be groomed for the job. That's first. Secondly, can they carry a swing state? or draw substantial votes away from the Democrats. Those are the two criteria, the two things Mr. Trump needs to look at. And from what I can see, he's not looking at those two things. He may very well blow it the way he blew the midterm elections 2 years ago. And that was not completely his fault. The RNC was to blame. The rhinos were to blame. But Donald Trump was in part to blame, particularly what happened in Georgia and Pennsylvania. That should not have happened, and Donald Trump is personally responsible. It was failed leadership. If he doesn't pick the right vice president, he can fail again. These convictions, if they take away 10% of the people who are voting for him in a swing state like Wisconsin or Pennsylvania or Michigan up in the Rust Belt, in the upper Midwest, that's all it would take. Biden only needs 270. It's not good. But I do thank God for what it says in the book of Daniel, chapter 2. It is the Lord who establishes kings and removes kings. America deserves nothing but judgment anymore. There are not enough committed Christians to be salt and light. The Christians who Donald Trump surrounded himself with for political reasons were heretical. People like Paula White. The people who were divorced and remarried and all sorts. They were the pseudo-evangelical riffraff, the money preachers. Those were the kinds of believers who he aligned himself with. I don't see God's hand on him, as you know, as I've said, after he hosted that homosexual gala in Mar-a-Lago. I don't see God's hand on him the way I once did. But he's blessed Israel. I hope for this God will show him favor. And he is the victim of an ugly, unspeakable injustice that is not just an attack on Mr. Trump, it's an attack on the Constitution and on freedom. And it will ultimately be used against Christians and Jews. He has a countenance. How any man can put up with the pressure he's been under for these years. People are praying for him, that's obvious, and I am praying for him, despite my misgivings. I would urge you also to please, please, please pray. Thank you so much. God bless. Over to Marco, David, and Co.